Welcome back. We will start with lecture 5 now. Till lecture 4 we have looked at the beginning of the first structures of the sentence, sentence structure, first syntactic structure that the children tend to learn. So, we looked at the functional categories, content categories, and what is the basic syntactic, the skeleton of the basic syntactic structure, how the hierarchy works and all that. So, now we will move on to slightly more complex structures with respect to acquisition of them in childhood. So, starting with questions. So, questions as in interrogative sentences. So, in case of English, question formation is not easy. The reason we are talking about English is that because of the initial studies, a lot of the studies focused only on English, and this is easy to follow for us also. So, that we will look at the basic structure, since we are looking at the basic structures and the basic movements and so on. So, we will stick to English for now. So, in English, question formation is not easy. What it means is that it involves inverting the subject and the auxiliary verb. So, for example, from a sentence like you can see it to can you see it. So, the can comes before and the you follows it. So, there is an inversion that is happening between the auxiliary and the subject. So, this is an important thing that that is part of English. So, this goes here and this goes here. So, this is the important part of creating question. And then there is the, so this is an yes no question, but then if you have a WH question in case of English, then it is a slightly more complex kind of a structure. So, this involves, so what does that complexity involve? This involves additional job of using interrogative words like who, what, when, where. So, this is why we call them WH questions. So, the questions that start with a WH word like who stole the book, where did you go, what do you like, kind of thing. So, wherever we have a WH question, we have the WH word in the beginning followed by the rest of the sentences. So, there is a fronting of a WH word that also is part of creating sentences, this kind of sentences, that is interrogative sentences in English language. Now, WH word is always not of only one kind, there can be the bare WH word and as well as there is a full WH phrase that English language uses. So, bare word we have already seen who, what, etc. Similarly, you can also have like a which one of the baby. So, this is a full phrase, full WH phrase. So, which one of the babies is wearing a white or a red shirt, let us say. So, this is what will go in the front. So, the entire phrase will be fronted and then the rest of the sentence will follow. And there is a, so as far as generative theory is concerned, when it moves, there is a noun phrase or a gap that is there in another position. So, what do you think is in the box means that there is a gap here. So, let us say something x is in the box. So, that x has moved here in the form of a WH word and hence there is a gap here. So, when there is a fronting of WH word, there is also a gap in the sentence in another position. Now, complex WH questions involve both a main clause and a complement clause. So, in these questions the WH word or WH phrase appears at the front of the main clause and the gap can be in the either in the subject position or in the object position of the complement clause. So, this becomes a slightly more complicated matter. So, this is this takes us to the domain of complex WH questions, not simple WH question will be what did you eat, for example, what do you like, where did you go. It is simple, but complex sentence will be, for example, what do you think happened in the, what do you think, and then there can be a relative clause, for example. So, those positions can be either subject or object position in the complement clause. So, the generative and the usage based perspective on these on question formation are slightly different. So, generative linguistics typically postulate that the WH word has been extracted, as we just saw, extracted from the gap and moved from there to the front of the question. So, we have just seen it was here This is, and then because it has moved, it creates a gap here and then it goes to the front position. So, that is what it means by extracted. So, there is a movement of the word from the previous position to the new position. Such questions are referred to as in generative tradition, this is called long distance WH questions or long distance dependencies. This has been studied extensively in generative format. Since long distance dependency constructions are complex and children tend to get them right quite early in life, hence this has been taken as an example of the as a proof of nativist theory. These are complex structures. Who do you think killed the tiger, let us say. So, this kind of structures are not very simple, and because it goes through all these kinds of movements and various kinds of permutations and combinations, and children tend to get them right quite early in life, is a proof for the nativist theory. However, on the other hand, usage based theory postulates a slightly different understanding of how questions are formed, how WH sentences are formed. They talk about a juxtaposition analysis, and as in children probably are using two questions and putting them together one after another. So, that is juxtaposition, because sometimes children's productions of LDD, that is long distance dependency, they produce questions like with a WH word in the beginning of both the main clause and the subordinate clause. So, for example, like this, what do you think what is in the box? So, this gap, what do you think what is in the box, this gap is often not mentioned, often sometimes children use both of them. So, both there are two questions put together and thereby we have this. So, this has led scholars to propose the juxtaposition analysis. For example, they sometimes use this. So, what way do you think how he put out the fire? So, this was not necessary. What way do you think he put out the fire would have been fine, but because sometimes children do use this kind of structure, hence the usage based theory says that probably there is a juxtaposition that they are doing rather than depending on a movement. So, there are two different questions that they put together, that is the idea. So, these can be produced by simply juxtaposing two independent questions, what do you think plus what is in the box, or an independent question and an indirect question. So, what way do you think plus how he put out the fire. So, this is what the juxtaposition analysis of the question formation is. So, juxtaposition analysis comes from the usage based theory. On the other hand, movement, the idea of movement comes from the nativist theory. These are the two ways of looking at it. So, one of the most important scholars in this domain is that of Thornton, and his examples, some of these examples I have quoted here. So, what do you think what is in here? This is by a child Peter 2 years and 10 months. What do you think what babies drink to grow big? So, these are the these are some of the examples that comes from his data. So, Umbridge and Levin remark that WH questions like the above could be produced as what do you think plus what is in here, right. So, however, this theory has not been accepted very widely, because on the account that children do not generally create questions like what do you think, what does Cookie Monster like. So, whereas this is not very uncommon, this is not typically common. So, what is happening here is that the subject the subject position or the object position in the clause is what the problem here is. So, in the big examples before, what do you think what is in the box, what do you think is in the box versus what do you think what does Cookie Monster like. So, there is the structural differences are there, and while the first one is kind of more common among children, the second one is not. So, based on that, then could medial WH questions with object extraction such as the previous example be composed using an independent question and an indirect question. So, what do you think? Do you know what Cookie Monster like? Can it be like this? So, what do you think? Do you know what Cookie Monster likes? Is it this kind of a structure? But this argument also has problems. The main problem here is that the difference between the subject and the object position. So, it is not convincing to analyze children's medial WH questions involving extraction from subject position in one way and object position in a different way. So, because why is it different here? Because here the do form is has to be accounted for if we have to make two questions out there. So, in case of the subject form subject position, you need a different analysis for object position and a different analysis, that does not seem to really work very well. So, it has not been very widely accepted. So, that is the two different positions with respect to forming the question sentences, the WH questions, WH sentences. Then comes our negative sentences, another slightly complex process. Again we will stick to English examples. The syntax of English for forming negative sentence is also quite complex. It requires the use of auxiliary verbs like question formation, as we just saw. So, you have the do come in somewhere and then the auxiliary inversion and so on. So, the negation negator must not follow the first auxiliary verb and it is often contracted onto it. So, I am eating, I am not eating. So, it cannot be I am not eating, here it is this is coming after this, right. So, similar to questions, if the positive sentence does not have any auxiliary, negative sentence will need one. It is not necessary that the positive sentence will have an auxiliary, but even if it does not in the negative, there has to be an auxiliary. So, go away, there this thing gets inserted. So, do not go away. So, you cannot simply say not go away, the auxiliary has to come into the picture. The only exception however, is when the sentence has a simple copula, in which case the negator follows the copula. So, Rani is nice, Rani is not nice, I was happy, I was not happy, right. So, this is the only exception. In case of English, before acquiring auxiliaries, children have negative sentences like this. So, you do not have the auxiliary is not yet here. So, it should be Kavya does not like broccoli, but they before they have understood, they have acquired the auxiliaries, this kind of structure. So, directly there will be no, just a no there before the main verb. So, no like broccoli, he not little, he is not little, he not little, like that. So, this is quite common as well. Auxiliaries appear between 2 and 3 years. The comprehension of complex negative structure is acquired late from 4 years onwards, that is what some of the scholars have reported. Then comes our passives. The nativist approach to passive is governed by again by movement, because that is one of the fundamental aspect of syntactic operations, that is what movement is, the various kinds of processes. So, even passives are created by movement. For example, the rock star is being chased by a fan. So, the fan is chasing and is being chased. So, you have a movement out there again, which is one of the basic building blocks, and on the other hand the usage based approach of course understands it slightly differently, as with the previous structures as well. So, as far as because usage based theory, if you recall, usage based theory accounts for the fact that children go from simple structure to complex structure, because the idea is that once they mastered the simple structure, they based on more and more input, they are able to create the complex structure. On the other hand, the nativist approach says that the entire structure is in place in the very beginning. All the problems that the children might exhibit are due to other reasons, but not about linguistic reasons. Anyway, so by as per usage based theory, this is how the stages probably are. So, beginning with a simple adjectival passive, it is broken, and then gradually they will be accruing lexically specific formulas like the X was broken. So, first it is broken, that is broken or was broken, then they will gradually create the structure by the Y. So, X was by the x was broken by the y, and finally, incorporating the more abstract constructions. So, remember we talked about this also, that starting with simpler parts, eventually getting more and more complex, and after a period of time they understand, they are not anymore dependent on the lexical entries, but they get the abstract notion. So, this is when the abstraction happens, and this is how they get the formula in their head. So, x b get verb by y. This is the formula. Now, once they have gotten the abstraction, they can create a number of constructions like this. So, there was a very well known study where they had elicited, this is an elicited production study, not spontaneous speech, elicited speech, reported full actional passives with by phrases by majority of the children under study. So, this data, they had 32 English speaking children who took part in the experiment. Out of them 29 could produce the by structure in case of an actional passive. So, for example, the horse is seen by Donald Duck, the horse is heard by Donald Duck. However, other kinds of passives are less common among children below 5 years. So, actional passives are learned before other than the other. Relative clause, then relative clause is a modifier that expresses a proposition about the noun phrase it modifies. So, the boy fed the elephant that blessed the locals. So, this is something a very common sight in some of the Indian states, be it Assam or Kerala, where elephants are seen blessing the local people. So, the boy fed the elephant that blessed the locals. So, this is the relative clause for us. The nativist account anticipates the early emergence of relative clause structure both in comprehension and in production. The reason being they are understood to be the again because the structure is already embedded among them. So, the boy fed the elephant that blessed the locals, again we have the gap here. So, the elephant blessed the locals, because by this account all varieties of relative clauses involve syntactic operations, that is what we have been seeing since the previous examples, including movement. So, this is what so the boy fed the elephant, that elephant, again there is a gap, there was a component here which is replaced by. So, this is how the structure goes. So, this is the nativist account. Children even younger than 3-year-old produce sentences with relative clauses. We have data in the domain. Actually, this is a domain with very rich with data. The one reason why I have not added all that because that will make things a little more, it will get lengthy. So, in order to stick to the timeline, we are not using too much of data, but I will add some of the in the appendix. I will add some supplementary information, because these are things that have been studied widely and there is a lot of literature on each of these, but here I am just giving you the basic ideas, the fundamentals of it. So, using an elicited production technique that was proposed by Hamburger and Crane, this another group elicited relative clauses from 20 Italian speaking children ranging in age from 2.8 to 3.11 years. 9 out of 20 children produced relative clauses in all the trials, and almost all of them produced at least a few such clauses, not if not all throughout the trials, but at least some, at least in many of those trials. So, that means children as even the youngest children children in this group who are 2.8 years of age could produce quite a good number of relative clauses. Not only the children towards the other side of the let us say 3 years, 3 and a half years old children, not only them, but even the youngest of the group could produce a good number of relative clauses. So, naturally this gives a proof of the nativist theories, that is how it is taken. However, again we are also looking at the usage based account here. So, contrary to nativist claims, children's comprehension of relative clauses are not met with equal success on all varieties of relative clauses, because there are different kinds of relative clause structure. So, the usage based account points out that children's comprehension are not always similar in all of those. So, some studies controlled for task demands and had better result. Task demands, sometimes what happens is in the experimental paradigm, the task demands might have an impact on the result that you get. So, the children not having adequate comprehension of relative clauses may not be because of the relative clauses, but because of the task demand, because of the kind of task within which this was embedded. So, that was controlled by many follow up studies, and then they found some better results with respect to comprehension. Still, children less than 5 years did not display adult performance. Why are we talking about adult like performance? Because this is what the nativist theory says, that children actually have the entire structure already. They understand the movements, they understand the syntactic operations, and hence they have the adult like capability already. So, but on the other hand, we also have some studies, some data pointing out that before 5 years they may not have the equal amount of kind of output. So, overall the nativist account anticipates that children should be equally adept at understanding or producing all types of the relative clauses. In fact, early comprehension has studies revealed that children do have more difficulty with some types of relative clause than others. So, data takes us to that part as well. Usage based approach answers this through a proposal of gradual development of different kinds of relative clause construction. So, nativist account anticipates that they will understand and produce all kinds of relative clauses from the very beginning. However, we do have some proof that this is not the case. Some of the structures appear before. So, some more difficulty with some types of relative clauses compared to some others. So, the usage based account, like many other domains, have tried to answer this through a gradual development. So, the main point of the usage based account is the gradual development of the relative clause constructions, like many other constructions. So, starting with simpler ones, gradually going to the more complex ones. So, that is how they have been analyzed it. So, based on the properties of the input, they go from simpler to more complex structure, but that is in the gist. But largely the larger amount of data typically show that children are actually capable of comprehending and producing many of these complex structures. Of course, there are contradictory examples, but at the same time we do have a lot of data from the from various groups studying that children do master various complex constructions pretty early. All of these. So, to sum up in this module, what did we look at in this module? We discussed in brief, of course, this is just one module devoted to syntactic structure acquisition among children. So, we discussed everything in short. So, we looked at various theories, many different theses regarding the acquisition of syntax. We looked at the stages of development from one word to two word and then more complex structures, and then we also saw some of the constraints. So, this is where we will end this module. As I said, some of the supplementary data will be added in the when we get the material, you will get the supplementary material as well. So that I will add some data from different languages around the world on some of these mechanisms, as well as some of the movements and operations as well. So, this is where we end this module. Thank you.